So I will start. I've been doing my little book tour, and I asked Christina if she would join for this, and I was so excited when you said yes, because if you haven't read Christina's work, then what are you even doing? Christina's book, Radical Focus, is the best book, the best text about OKRs. It's one of those things that's about OKRs, but it's not really about OKRs. It's about how people work together and about the challenges people have actually doing stuff and communicating with each other, which is the thing I have always been the biggest nerd about. So when I started reading your work and I was like, oh, here's somebody who's writing about OKRs, writing about how teams manage themselves, writing about drawing pictures, but that's never really what you're writing about. You're writing about how people work together to do stuff. And you write about it so well. And in my book, your book is extensively cited, and your work has always been
so they can just buy yours and get cheaper.
Yeah, just buy mine. It has all the best stuff. You don't need to buy No. So I've had the pleasure of getting to know you over the last couple of years, and it's always such a joy to spend time with you.
Thank you.
I am so grateful that you could be here today, and I am so excited to share our conversation with you today.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I met Matt at Product at Heart, and we keep running into each other all over and over and over again, apparently walking the same paths. But I have adopted his wonderful book, Product Management in Practice, for my Stanford class on product management. It's the first thing that I get them to read so they understand what product management actually is, what it looks like in the real world. Super accessible, super terrific book. And then got a second edition, so you know there must be something going right with it. And very excited about your new book.
Thank you.
So I'm really looking forward to it. And we wandered all of Hamburg talking about everything on earth, including product management.
Product management, Frank O'Hara.
Yeah, exactly.
All the stuff that matters.
All the good stuff. And the importance of coffee.
And the importance of coffee, always.
So anyway, okay.
Okay.
Shall we?
Let's.
Do you want to start?
I'll start. So in the foreword to the second edition of Radical Focus.
Which forward?
In the foreword to the author's foreword to the second edition. I have an answer to that question. You worry that OKRs will wind up on the trash heap of management fashion, which is a great phrase to begin with, the trash heap of management fashion. Are you more or less worried about that than you were when you wrote those words in the second edition?
Oh, that's such a good question. Wow. You know, when I was waiting tables when I first moved to San Francisco, we had TQM come to our restaurant. And I think that's one of those places where you know you're saturated the market completely when your restaurant's using various management fads. And then a Mexican restaurant reached out to me to talk to me about OKRs, and I was like, this can't be good. This can't be good. Actually, they did a good job adopting it. But, OKRs, I knew OKRs were in trouble when people started saying sure all the time.
Interesting.
So all these people are like, but we can't have just one OKR. We do too many things. Okay, the consultants say, or John Doerr's like, yeah, you can have stretch OKRs and you can have achievable and committed, and it got more and more complex, and after a while it started to look like safe. And I'm like, the thing I really loved about OKRs when I ran into them working with them at Zynga and then later with the startups I worked with is they were so small, they were so simple, and they were just nifty.
Yeah.
And when they stop being nifty and they become this sort of monolithic beast, I'm like, it's too hard and it doesn't work anymore. And so I genuinely feel that, it's so funny because I'm like, I'm never going to consult on OKRs again. Fuck it, I'm done with it. And then I'm like, but I run my entire life on OKRs.
Yeah.
I just did a review, and I've been literally setting OKRs quarterly and mapping at them weekly since 2013.
Oh, wow.
And so I believe in them deeply, but I have trouble believing in them in the form that they are showing up a lot lately. And it's very painful for me because I'm like, no, you don't have to suffer. It could be okay.
It could be okay.
It could be even awesome.
Are we ready? Sorry. So when you say people saying sure, do you mean like the consultants?
The consultants.
And the people who should, in a sense, be like the teachers?
Yeah, exactly.
Being more just kind of like,
Yeah, and I mean, and John Doerr's book, I guess I should say thank you to them for all the business they've sent me over the years. Because he wrote a book and he's like, I'm not a consultant, you know.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this work. Here, send it to the other person who wrote a book on OKRs. But there was too much of a, it's okay to do it these 50 other ways, at which point it isn't anything. It doesn't mean anything if it can be done 30 different ways. And while I do think you have to adapt OKRs for your company and your situation, it doesn't mean to throw out the really important ideas, which are about focus, about impact, about making sure that you are paying attention to things that really make a difference. And that gets lost very quickly, and people are like going, wordsmithing. I always get scared when people are doing like all this precious little wordsmithing, because that means they've probably forgotten what it means to actually focus on what matters.
oh, interesting.
They're fiddling instead.
Yeah, the fiddling. So I'm curious, is anyone here in OKR season right now?
Is there ever a time that's not OKR season?
Well, I wanted to get, because I feel like this is one of the funny things that's happened, is that now there's like duck season, rabbit season, and OKR season. And you write a lot in the book about the importance of cadence. Is OKR season a good cadence? Or is it a troubling, or this is a very loaded and leading question, but
You tricked me into coming here, didn't you?
I did, absolutely did. Talk about OKR season. What's what is the deal with it?
I mean, if you're doing it right, all seasons are OKR season, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, your most important goals are your most important goals. That's why you call them your most important goals, right? So if it's important, you want to be paying attention to it all the time, and paying attention to it every day and every week and every month. So the idea that you have this planning season just feels contrary to effective OKR.
Yeah.
You should always be saying, remember guys, this is the most important thing we're doing. And it's kind of like, I remember reading Gib Biddle's writings on strategy from Netflix, which are just magnificent. If you haven't read them, go look them up. And he talks about the weekly strategy meeting, and I was like, this is somebody who actually understands what strategy is for, because they look at it every single week. And it's the same thing as OKRs. You're looking at your goals every single week. There are things that just matter. One is you got to know where you're going, you got to know how you're going to get there, and you got to keep paying attention of how do we know when we've arrived. And if you aren't thinking about those things regularly, then you're caught up in the morass of whatnot. I don't know how else to talk about it. But I mean, that's very much what you're doing, right? With your impact, you're like, focus, eyes on the deadline.
Right. Well, it's funny because the thing that I keep finding, there's kind of two questions, both of which were inspired by your book, that I ask companies when I work with them and they're doing OKRs. The first, which is related to cadence, is like, how do you use your OKRs in your sprint planning? And the answer is usually, what?
Why?
Like, well, during OKR season, we stop sprint planning because we spend the whole season fiddling over our OKRs, and then we forget about them until the next OKR season.
Oh, you wait for the OKR fairy to come and grant your wish. We set them like teeth underneath the pillow.
Exactly.
And the next morning, that all your goals will come true.
Oh, I like that. I mean, that's probably better than a lot of companies I've worked with are managing things, just to like wait for the OKR fairy, because at least they're not actively making things worse while they wait for the OKR fairy. So the OKR fairy, folks, you heard it here first. The other conversation, can you advance to the next slide? So the other, this is from Radical Focus, and this is the image that kind of changed my life and set me on the course towards writing this book. But the other question I ask is, if you look at the lowest level goals, do they add up to the highest level goals? So a lot of companies that do these cascades will wind up with like a deck with 100 OKRs for 20 teams. And I will say, okay, well, can you walk me through how, if each team achieves all of those lower level OKRs, they will add up to the top level OKRs, which is also treated as a completely absurd question. Because how could we possibly know? Like, we spent a month cascading these and having these fiddly, meetings where we make sure we have the perfect cascade. But by the time we're done cascading, nobody ever wants to look at these goals or talk about them or think about them ever again. And whether or not they add up to anything that matters to the business is an absurd and impossible question. So I'm gonna.
The question, in both scenarios, you have team goals twice. Why isn't one an individual goal?
Oh, that's a
question for you.
That's a
Mike.
long question. There's multiple teams, but you should never have individual goals. There's a lot of reasons not to ever have individual goals. One is it's very hard for an individual to make impact. With the one exception of it is perhaps you've hired a growth hacker. Someone like that maybe can act as a company of one human, but most of the time we're so interdependent that owning a goal is ridiculous. It's just not possible. But a small multidisciplinary team can hold a goal together collectively.
But doesn't that take away accountability?
Well, if you, God, it's so hard not to say this and sound kind of facile. If you know how to manage people, it should be irrelevant. Like the way you manage people is you say, this is what I expect from you for your job, from your role, and then you check in every week and go, how can I help you? And are you helping me? And you just keep doing that. Actually, very much I wrote The Team That Managed Itself, my second book, based on the fact that everybody's going, well, how do I manage people? And I was like, didn't somebody else write a book on this? Okay. And there are a lot of good ones, you know, Drucker, Mintzberg. Mintzberg has some wonderful stuff on management. But I thought I would write something with a story in case people didn't want to read the hardcore stuff. But yeah, it's just, you hold people accountable by asking them, what do you think you should be doing? And then saying, why is it not happening? And do we have to remove some blockers? And do you need some training? And how could I help?
So I've always had that when I've worked for other people, but I've never had that mindset.
Yeah, OKRs is just it's just a nifty little tool. It's not an all-seeing, all-knowing Uber framework. Thank you for saying, of course not. A lot of people seem to think it is like everything, and it's not.
Frameworks are just that. They're guides.
Yes, it's a nifty little thing that helps a lot of people.
So I have a follow-up conversation starter. So I saw this, right? And this idea of having individual, like team goals and department goals kind of orbiting one step away from company goals.
Yeah.
That idea of keeping your goals one step away from company goals is something that I now see in every company that's doing goals well, whether they're OKRs or North Star metrics or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And when I work with teams and I tell them, all right, you know, let's set our goals one step away, they always have the same fear, which is if you don't cascade 5 levels down, then these team goals that are orbiting around company goals are outside of your immediate control. You can't check a box and just say, well, we did the thing.
Yeah.
And they often require collaboration across teams, right? One team I worked with, I had a product manager run up to me after we set a goal and say in a panicked voice, like, but to do this, we have to work with marketing. As if this was
marketing.
like the most egregious affront to the team's autonomy and you know, very existence. How do you work through that psychological component? How do you know, it seems to me like the urge to cascade is very much the urge to control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so.
Which I'm clearly not very good at when it comes to my glass. But how do you work through that with people? How do you manage that interpersonal piece, that fear of being accountable for things that are beyond your immediate or your team's immediate control?
You know, it's funny, Matt, because I know you know the answer to this one because I read your book. So, but nice layup. So, as you and I both know, that the product manager's number one job is to be persuasive.
Yeah.
To be what?
Persuasive. More than anything else, we're persuaders. And we're not persuaders like Svengali-like and Rasputin-like figures. We just talk to people and we listen to people and we say, oh, I don't know, how could we do this? How can we get this done? What do you need? Here's what I need. Let's talk. So much of it is about that. And everybody has this like weird fantasy that if I could only be the boss, I would tell everybody what to do and they would do it. And then you talk to CEOs and they're like, nobody does what I ask them to do, ever. So the idea that someday I'm going to get to a position where people are going to do what I want to do is just not going to happen. So instead, we have these conversations, and we have lots and lots of them, and we're patient, and we know that a no becomes a maybe, and we just keep at it. So I think in the case where people are like, I want to have control, you just have to give that up. That's a lie. It's an illusion. And instead, you have to have a million conversations.
Tell me more about that, the illusion. Like, what is the illusion of control in this context, and why is it so compelling to people? Why is it so hard to give that up?
Oh gosh, I'm not a psychologist. I wish I knew. I mean,
is there a psychologist in the house?
Yes. Anybody understand human brains? I'm in HCI, so I guess it's as close to it as I
was going to say, you're as close to a psychologist as I know, I think. So.
I think we're fed a lot of ideas about how companies work, like the big boss who tells people what to do and then people do it. And I went through this in my own career. You know, I started out as actually basically content manager, and I thought if I was only an engineer, people would pay attention to me and listen to what I said, and I became an engineer, and I'm like, oh, if only I was, you know, senior design person because they keep handing us these designs to make. So when I'm in design, I'll be in control. No, I wasn't in control as a designer. Oh, maybe if I would become a product person, maybe if I became a GM, and just you get to close enough to the top, and you go, nobody ever gets to tell anybody what to do.
Yeah.
And if they do, people just quit and leave, if they're assholes. So at some point or another, you just have to figure out how I'm going to give up this concept of control, and I'm going to start thinking about collaboration and conversation, hopefully. Or people try to do Svengali-like stuff. But I've never, ever in my entire career, and I bet you could say the same, have gone to one of these talks and not had somebody come up to me, but why won't anybody do what I want them to do? I know I'm right. I have this wonderful, amazing book that I read and has all the answers in it. And if we just did Agile, Scrum, whatever, perfectly, then our company would be so much better. And it's like, no, you just have to do slightly better and work together.
Yeah.
And I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've certainly worked with teams that would rather immediately declare failure to completely transform than to take intermediate steps and try and learn, right? It's easier in a sense to say, oh, we could never be, we're never going to be a best-in-class digital company because we're a bank and we're regulated, or we're, every industry thinks it's unique from every other industry, and that their situation is completely, so far-fetched that nobody would ever understand. And frankly, so many of the best practices and published case studies we have come from a very small number of Silicon Valley companies that have completely unique and irreproducible commercial circumstances.
Oh yeah, have you read No Rules by Aaron Meyer and Reid Hoffman?
I haven't.
It's an extraordinary book. It's a magnificent book. I love it so passionately, and I would say 80-90% of companies can't do what they do.
Yeah.
The only reason it works at all is because they hire the very, very best people on the planet, which they can do because of where they're located, who are good at that particular industry. There are great people elsewhere who are great in other industries, but Netflix happens to be in friggin' Cupertino, where they can go just next door and steal some amazing people, and then they can run in this way, but it's really hard to do it in other places.
Yeah.
And so there's always going to be the struggle. So the question then is, how do we become our best selves?
Yeah.
Don't try to be Spotify, don't try to be Netflix, but what would it mean if we were our best selves?
That's such a good question. What is the best version of this company? And I think so much of that comes down to understanding your business model, which is something, there's a story I tell in this book about an engineering manager I worked with who complained to her CEO that the engineers who report to her weren't talking about the business model. And the CEO is like, wait a second, I have product managers coming in here all day saying, we're too business-centric, we're not customer-centric enough. And now you're complaining to me that engineers aren't talking about the business model. What's going on? And this engineering manager, she said, well, I think I understand the confusion. When people say we're too business-centric, that means we're too focused on politics, on best practices, on making the right executives happy about the right things. The business model is intrinsically customer-centric because it's how we exchange value. Like, if we understand the business model, we understand how to sell stuff, and we can't understand how to sell stuff unless we know who we're selling stuff to and what they're actually willing to buy. But again, I think I just keep coming back to this idea that the stuff people are complaining about in the business is stuff that feels more controllable, right? It's outside of those market dynamics. It's outside of those customer dynamics. It's stuff that we can complain about and set as fixed constraints and say, I can't do anything because of this executive, or I can't do anything because of the industry we're in, or I can't do anything because of this. Whereas I like to think that when you look at the business model, when you really look at when you approach your particular business's particular value exchange with openness and curiosity, it leads you to things you can do, not things you can't do, or at least I hope it does.
Well, you make me really wonder if that's one of the reasons that people become so process-focused, whether it's agile or lean or whatnot. You can control your process.
Yeah.
But controlling whether or not people buy your shit, that is really hard. Figuring out, how do I grow my numbers? How do I get more sales? How do I increase my market reach? That's really mysterious and hard, and there are some good practices, but you feel so out of control. You can be throwing every single thing you've got and still not be able to move a number, and it's very painful after a while.
It's very painful. And it's also, so Tricia, my friend and business partner, is here, and we did some work with a company a while ago, which I don't want to say we ambushed their executive team, but they thought that we were going to have a fun day of doing easy little research in their very nice office. But instead, we asked them, what's a company you think is doing interesting stuff in the area where you want to grow, which was customer service. And they said, oh, Home Depot's doing really interesting stuff. So we all got on a bus and went to Home Depot. And
Saw that coming.
yeah, and these folks were like, you could see the visceral fear of being out of control, right? These are folks who, most of their professional world is people wanting things from them, people coming up to them and saying, will you approve this? Will you give me this budget? Will you look at this deck? We've worked with a lot of companies where I think you can see that the two unofficial classes of people are the people who present and the people who critique. And the goal is to become a person who never presents and always critiques. We worked with a company where we showed up and we were like, we want to work with you. And they were like, present a deck and we'll tell you what's wrong with it. We were like, no, that's not.
That doesn't sound fun.
And they were like, but then if we have to present the deck, then this other person is going to tell us what's wrong with our deck. And we don't want that to be how things work. But it's just really interesting to see, like, I never felt more human empathy for these people than I did seeing them try to walk up to strangers in Home Depot and ask them questions when they're so used to having like a fortress of control. Like there's a context, right? There's a context of their day-to-day that they've set for themselves where those interactions are controlled, where they know what to expect, where they have all the power in those interactions. And I think that when you're learning from users, when you're setting yourself up to expose yourself to those market dynamics, to the reality that no matter how much process you've put in place or how much power you wield within an organization, like the people who decide whether or not your company exists next year aren't people who you actually have that control over.
No.
They're not people who really care what your title is or how nice your office is. I think that's scary for people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I don't understand it, but I understand. I've seen it so enough to believe that it exists. I never think I'm in control of anything, so
That's probably really healthy.
it's very accurate anyway. But I was thinking about this. One of the big insights I had when I first came to this was everybody would come up to me and go, well, I thought about cascading very effectively when I was writing for startups, because in a startup, there's like 2 layers, maybe 3 on the outside.
Yeah.
So cascading actually worked really well, because the CEO who was sitting right over there would say, this is our biggest goal, and everybody would be like, okay, that's cool, I know what to do now. But once you start getting layers, I tried to expand it, it didn't expand, but what did work really well was for the company to say, this is our goal, now everybody decide what you should be doing.
Yeah.
But speaking of control, it takes that leap of faith that you can say that. You can say, here's what's the most important thing for the company. Y'all figure it out. That is a big giving up of control as well.
Yeah.
You have to trust that that you've hired smart people. And if you're not hiring smart people, you have another set of problems going on.
Well, and you also get into that kind of two-way standoff, which I've seen a lot of teams get into,
Say more.
where they're like, well, they haven't told us what to do, and executives are like, well, we're trying to get them to say what to do.
Oh, yeah.
And I think for teams that are used to being disempowered, that learned helplessness can really kick in. And I've worked with a lot of teams
Very much so.
where just trying to get, they'll say, well, we weren't consulted. We weren't consulted in the strategy. And I'm like, okay, what do you think the strategy should be? And they're like, we weren't consulted. Don't ask us that.
That's not our job.
Yeah, exactly. It's our job to complain about the strategy we're given and say why it makes it impossible for us to have an impact.
Yeah.
But I think, again, that it's been interesting just how when a team is brave enough to set their own objectives, even when those objectives are wrong, starting from a place of like, no, this actually isn't going to work, actually helps them get to a better place. It's the teams that are afraid to commit to anything that are the teams I see struggling the most.
I always have a great deal of empathy. A long time ago, I saw a dentist. I'd had bad dentist experiences, and I had to have a tooth dealt with. And I was like cringing back from the dentist, and he goes, somebody must have really hurt you once. And I was like, when I see teams who are like that, where they're scared and they're like, we weren't consulted and we can't do this, I think somebody really hurt you, didn't they? Somebody ripped you a new one because something didn't happen. Somebody fired somebody that you really cared about who did something that you wish you could do now and you're scared to do. Like, we don't have a lot of direct control as CEOs or general managers, but we have so much indirect control from our actions. And if we're not very careful about our actions and our words, we can really hurt people very badly. And if we want to have empowered teams, it has to start with handing over that power. And I talk to this when I talk with my executive clients all the time is, make the small practice of handing over power. Say, hey, where are we going to eat today? Oh, where do you feel like? Just anytime you listen to somebody and really look at them and listen to what they're saying, you're making them feel a little more empowered. And that way, when you ask them for the hard stuff, they practice on the small stuff. But it's so easy to buy your own press. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're very important, and you're a big boss, and therefore I must act like a big boss. And no, that's not good.
My unofficial metric when I work with new leadership teams is asking if anyone on the team wants a coffee.
Oh, yeah.
And seeing what happens.
Always bring the donuts.
Yeah, always bring the donuts, Ken Norton. But you can tell a lot. I worked with one founder who I offered to get him coffee once, and then for the rest of the time I worked with this company, I was the coffee guy. He'd just be like, Matt's my guy who gets me coffee. And I was like, that's interesting. I worked with another leadership team where they left me to clean up their coffee afterwards. Like, they all left their coffee cups in this room for me. And I was like, okay, this is good information for me. Like, this is...
Welcome to being a woman.
Well, yeah, thank
Sorry.
you. Yeah.
You're so empathic.
I'm one of the good ones.
You're one of the good ones. Yeah, always happen.
But it's, I think it's the kind of overlaps and dynamics between power and control are really interesting in this.
And giving up
context.
power, even if it is picking up the coffee cups, or not picking up the coffee cups sometimes is very important also. But being aware of these power dynamics and then trying to level the playing field is so important. We do it a lot when we do user research as well.
Yeah.
When we do user research, there's always a problem. My students won't believe me, but they're like, no, you're Stanford students. People think you're fancy. And they're like, oh, no, I can't even do my bed. I forget to make my bed. I can't get to this class on time. But when you go in to do user research, people are like, ooh, you're big, you're important, you're powerful, and you have to find ways to give away the power, make the person you're interviewing, you're the expert at you're the expert in the way of your life. And I feel like that same power dynamic has to be worked with all your relationships. You have to find a way to create equal footing in every single relationship you have. And sometimes that means trying to be tougher than you are if you're working with somebody who has a lot of power, and sometimes that means giving away your power when you're working with somebody who might traditionally be seen as less powerful, like an admin, who, by the way, admins run all businesses.
Yes.
No, don't mess with your admins. But being aware of treating everybody as an equal partner in your work is really important.
So I'm thinking about a lot of things through this lens now. And when I think about the teams that say, well, we can't work with marketing, we can't work with... how much of that do you think is like wading into ambiguous power structures? Because like within your own team, it's like you kind of know, you've made the implicit and explicit agreements with your team. But I feel like once you wade into another team, especially another team that might have different managers, regardless of different goals, like they literally report to different people.
Yeah.
I feel like you walk into this weird environment where it's like, I don't know the terrain. I don't know who's in charge. I don't know who needs what power-wise.
Yeah.
How do you try to work with folks when you are in a new space of unknown power dynamics? Like when you have that first meeting with the marketing team and you're like, there's a senior marketer and a junior marketer here. I don't know what the relationship is between these people. I don't know if they have to do what I want them to do. I don't know if I have to do what they want me to do. How can you approach those conversations in a way that leaves as much space open to work together towards those things that really matter?
I don't have answers, but I have some thoughts.
I would love
if
to
you
hear
have
your thoughts.
answers, please give them. But I think when I was at Yahoo, we had a matrix structure, and I'm dyslexic, and I was like, I couldn't keep track of who reported to who and who was my boss. So I kind of knew it was Irene, but that wasn't the person who was telling me what to do. It was Jeff, and so I just thought, fuck it, I can't take this anymore. I can't figure out who has any power. I'm just treat everybody exactly as if they report to me. And,
that's interesting.
Yeah, and when people report to me, I treat them, I've hired them, they're very smart, they're very capable, I treat them with a ton of respect. I'm like, here's what I need from you to be successful, here's what I can do for you to help you be successful. And I just go into that relationship, and I went into that relationship with absolutely everybody, and it was incredibly effective.
That's so interesting.
Maybe if I was a different person, I would have treated like I was reporting to everybody, but that was too exhausting. It was much simpler for me to say, okay, everybody's working for me in a certain way, and that's how I ended up telling Jeff Weiner, I'm making all the most important business decisions for you because you won't give me any fucking priorities. And he was like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, I decide what designers are working on what projects because you don't give me any priorities. And he goes, okay, I'll have priorities for you by tomorrow morning. But I was able to have that kind of conversation with him in a very blunt fashion because I was exhausted by all the power complexities, and I just couldn't do it. My brain wouldn't do it.
Did you have a question?
Well, I was going to say, I've had this as a person coming from product, coming to marketing for collaboration. I've literally had with the Cascade structure, the response that, well, we can't really work together too closely because we have to focus on our metrics because we're both 3 levels down from the company, whereas if you keep it all centered around the company goals, you're only 1 level away. So you should be able to collaborate better than being like 3 or 4 levels down.
That's the hope.
Yeah, and what do we mean when we say our?
Well, marketing said
our goals.
We have to focus on MQLs
Yeah.
and skills. Like that's what we're judged on. So we can't really give too many of your resources to, this product launch because we have to focus on our funnel.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is incentives. If you say one thing and your incentives say something else, the incentives always win. I remember that from Yahoo, where we're like, our superpower is that we have news and photos and movies and this, and that's how we're going to win the market. And then they would just give out bonuses based on how well your department went. So you can imagine how well collaboration happened. It didn't happen at all. So I think that that's another thing for leaders to really pay attention to is follow the money, because that's what people will do.
Cool. How are we doing on time?
Great. Yeah, about 10, 15 more minutes.
Should we open up the floor?
Please do open that
more
floor.
Formally. Everybody,
We just have too much fun. We get together and every 6 months.
I want to make sure that everybody who asks a question gets a book.
Yes, give away books.
So our first question askers.
How about the talkers get water?
Yeah. So if you could just.
Hey Matt, can I have a book?
Yeah, of course. Organizers get books too.
First question, I'm just joking.
And you get a book, and you get a book,
Yeah.
and you get a book.
Hey,
Honestly.
Thank you. We don't want to take these home with us.
no. Oh,
They
almost
weigh
set.
too
Thank
much.
you.
When's the movie coming out?
I wish.
The book, the movie. Radical Focus, the book, the movie. I mean, if there's any business book that would make a movie, it's Radical Focus, right?
It's got
'Cause
a
narrative.
story, yeah.
It's got a story. It's got characters. It's got people you care about.
Yeah.
I'd watch that movie. Yes.
So I am curious, with all the observations I've heard about marketing working with product, I come from engineering technical background that transitioned into user research. I found that there's a big factor, and I'm looking to transition into product management. I found that there's a big factor that is tied to empathy and language when people are really frustrated with a different team. Could you comment a little bit on that? And then I have another question if you don't.
All the empathy in the world for our user is 0 for a coworker. My God. I mean, it's very painful. I solve a lot of my, I'm technically an introvert. Nobody ever believes it, but I am an introvert. And so the way I solve networking is just to treat every problem as a user research problem. That's why I was like, yay, user research. Just go, oh, really? Oh, tell me more about that. That's fascinating. And I find that it works really well with your coworkers. Like if you go, I used to think marketing was stupid until I met a badass marketer. And then I was like, oh my God, my universe just opened up. This is a superpower. So part of it is, ignorance, just not knowing what good looks like and not knowing what a competent person is. But the way to find that out is to be open and curious.
I think, yes, plus
And?
one to all of that. The other thing I've found is that in a lot of cases, things that feel like big disagreements are actually tactical misalignments around communication. Like, people have really loaded expectations around communication. Like, we wound up writing a comms manual when we worked together because I think I would freak out sometimes because Trisha would I wouldn't hear from you for a few days and then I'd get a million notifications on Google Docs that you had left a million comments and I would stop doing whatever I was doing and I'd be like, oh, Trisha wants me to respond to everything. And then I would call you and you'd be like, I don't expect you to respond to anything. This just happens to be the time that I'm working on this. And so we started putting some explicit agreements in place around when you leave a comment, it's an FYI unless you put something like this in. I just started experimenting with this format where, like, if you're doing an important document across teams or functions, there's like a whole chartering process where if you highlight something in red, that means you like reject it. And if you leave a comment, it's considered an FYI unless you do. So I think there are also like communication systems you can use, because different teams also have different expectations and different cadences for communication, and bringing those agreements and making them explicit rather than letting the assumptions turn into sort of emotional assumptions can also just be a really like sort of a tactical gimme, which means that at the very least you're not letting those tactical things become more emotional things.
Yeah.
And could I just bother you with my second question, because I'm just so curious. So you mentioned about business models not necessarily being always in the forefront. How do you handle business model communication across a very large organization? I used to work for Medtronic, huge, systematic, building multiple systems of products. You could never connect to the business model. When we talk about startups, you can always tie everything to initial hypotheses. How do you observe that people keep teams, especially like product things, close?
I'm going to answer that question with this book, but with Pencil Me In by Christina Wodtke. I'm using your German
My German name.
pronunciation. Yeah. Draw it. Like this is, it feels like a facile answer, but it's really the thing I found the most useful. When I sit down and work with teams, I'm like, draw the business model. Like, how does your team's work feed into the business model? Just draw it. Just
Draw the org
visualize
model.
it. Draw the org model. Like, get it down on paper. It's been so helpful working with. Sometimes these things are really hard to verbalize, but once you start mapping it out, then you can understand a lot. So I think like one of the things this book has helped me do is like when someone's like, I don't understand, I'm like, well, let's just get a piece of paper out. Let's start drawing it. Like, let's start drawing, like, who's our customer? Here's our customer. Here's a little Star Trek person. Here's a little, here's the business. Like, what do we exchange? How do we exchange it? How do we do this? So I think in a lot of cases, starting with a visual and like a generative visual can be a really helpful way to have that conversation.
And do you ever make sure it's aligned with anybody, right? Like any higher power, or do you sort of run with the assumptions that your team draws?
That's a great question. I think it depends, but I also think, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, that a team's local understanding of the business model can be really valuable, even if it isn't like, if you don't go through, so one of the main ideas in my book, in Impact First Product Teams, is like, it's up to each team to draw a direct line between the work it's doing and the value of that work to the business. Because if you rely on the business to get the middle sorted out, you're going to be waiting a long time. And you're probably going to find that the middle has like 8 different organizing concepts, which are all slightly at odds with each other, which is part of why it can be hard to do that, because you're like, okay, well, we're doing this, but then we also have these 8 initiatives we're working towards, or with one company I'm working with 55 initiatives we're working towards. Then we also have bets that are somewhat aligned with initiatives, but somewhat different. Also, we have objectives. So we have these 3 things that are all slightly different, but maybe the same, but we don't really know. So it's really hard to know how our team, so sometimes if you're just like, here's the business model as we understand it, here's like the existential exchange of value at the heart of this business. If we can feed into that directly, then we're in a much stronger position than we are if we try to run through every layer and like get the executive whose pet project was bets to like how we talk about bets, and the executive whose pet project was initiatives, who hates the executive whose pet project was bets, which is how we wound up with bets and initiatives at the same organization. Like, to run that through each of them is often diminishing returns versus sitting down as a team and saying like, yeah, our work is important to the business for this reason, and we're going to go.
By the way, if you're going, why does he keep talking about bets? What's all this bets business? Read Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. It's a magnificent book.
It's a really, really good book.
So good, and written by a professional poker player, and has everything to do with your job. It's amazing. Thinking in Bets. It's super, super good. What I was going to say is all companies aren't big companies. Big companies are a bunch of tiny companies. They're a bunch of city-states. And so if you can answer the question, how does my group provide value? And how does your group provide value, and how are we going to create that value together? That's the business model. Yep. So as opposed to thinking up there, sometimes it's good to think What, think global, act local?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, let's go here. Hi.
Give her the book.
Oh,
Can you hand it to
give-
her? I don't want to carry these home.
You mentioned that you did,
There's another one over there. Grab it.
you mentioned that you were a content manager, and then you went to engineering, and then a big product and design. I'm just kind of curious, like, about making those different pivots in your career. Like, do you get schooling for it, or do you learn the skills while you're on the job? Just curious.
My experience has always been that it's easier to change positions within a company. So you go into the company, you prove your value as X, and then you start sidling up to Y, and you say, wow, design is super interesting. Tell me more. How can I learn this? I've rarely had formal schooling. I usually just provided a lot of value. Like when I moved from front-end coding to design group, it was because I was going to the code reviews, to say, can we actually build this crazy stuff you guys are designing? And I knew a lot about usability and Jacob Nielsen stuff, and he's like, come join us. So I have been able to move within it. And sometimes it just is as big of a problem as saying, hey, I actually think I would be really good at this job. Can you tell me more? Can I make that my game plan? Talk to your boss and say, this is a direction I'd like to go in. Who could I talk to about it? And if you're awesome, they'll be like, I'm so sad, but at least you're not going to our competitor. So, and it'll happen. Big companies, though, like Google will pay you to learn anything. Like you want to learn how to play saxophone, they'll pay for it. So there are companies that are amazing like that. I didn't work at Google except 4 days, but that's another story.
I worked 2 weeks.
Woo! Woo! Google's not for us. But often you'd be surprised that just by saying, this is something that's really interesting, can you help me find a way that I could explore this direction? A good boss will work with you.
Big plus one on that, much easier to move laterally than to, what?
Change company and change job, that's hard.
Yes. Did you have your hand up? Yes.
Okay, so I work as a product specialist, and
Ooh.
my work is working with the customer success team and the product team.
Love it.
You're the glue.
Yeah.
But they want me to tell them any recommendations they have working with the customer success team and everything. But when I actually go and tell them, okay, this is what our clients are facing, this is what we need to improve, they would just focus on some new features and doing something fancy, but never on the actual client issue. So, how do I make them understand?
Persuasion. Yeah, I mean, there's so many answers to that. Like, I think persuasion is a big topic, and there's been many books written on it. One of the things I like to do is say, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. Like, if they're saying, we're going to add AI, and I'm like, oh, really? Which AI? What kind of AI? What do you see? How do you see that playing out? What do you think the advantage of that's going to be? What's something we could do? Wow, that sounds kind of risky. What's a small thing we could do to check it out? I find asking a lot of questions. For me, that's how my style of trying to figure it out. And sometimes you can be like, okay, well, why don't we run that experiment? And I'd like to circle back on this other concept that came out of customer success. Can you think of a small way we could try that out also, since we can try a few small bets, perhaps? But people love to talk. Look at us. We're up here talking away, having the best time. And if you ask them questions and they start talking, they're going to love you so hard. People love somebody to listen to them. And the more they trust you, the easier it is to get them to listen to you when you have to say the things you want to say. So asking questions, listening hard, and being patient.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. If you can find out why they're excited about those shiny things and build on that excitement and kind of gently redirect it towards the things that matter collaboratively.
Or both.
Then, yeah, that puts you in a good position. Yes.
We started the talk talking about OKRs and impact, and then quickly, delved into the nitty-gritties of like how do you create like that understanding of OKRs down, the organization, and like how do we create impact when we are like talking, working between teams, and we run into problems of like power structures. My question is, how much of this is a question of culture and hiring versus like systems and processes?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think part of what I keep coming back to is that you always have limited areas of leverage, right? Like if you're working at or with a company, like even if you're hiring for a whole department, you're not hiring for every department. And even if you are hiring for a team, like other people are hiring for other teams. Similarly, process and structure, like you have some leverage over that, and it can be the area where it feels like you have the most control. But again, you never really have control. So the question, I think, is always like, what can you do to try to have these conversations and create this alignment where there's the opportunity to do so? I think, honestly, like 90% of product management is just finding the next move and not letting yourself get stuck and just figuring out, okay, like, what's this next little move we can make? What can we do? What's the next conversation we can have if somebody's hell-bent on making this feature that makes no sense? Like, what's the next conversation I can have to at least open up an area for understanding? If, I have a team that's doing 37 OKRs, can I get them to at least say, all right, fine, let's retrospect on them at the next quarter and see if having 37 OKRs was the right number of OKRs to have.
It wasn't.
It wasn't. Yep. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. But I think that a lot of this is really about like the extent to which the particular situation is caused by all of these different variables. It is always super different from place to place. But I think there's actually something, and this feels like very anti-systems thinking of me in a way that's weird, but I'm going to roll with it. There's something to be said for like, I can't control the causality of the system. Like, I can't understand how everything got to the way it is, but I can start making little changes in the system and seeing how the system reacts to those changes. And based on those little changes, those little experiments, those little conversations, I can actually begin to understand the system better and see how the system shifts and changes over time.
I do think, though, that you can't fix bad people with good process.
Yeah.
And bad process and bad people will be bad. So, it's just like a lot of people would rather introduce OKRs into a company rather than have a few difficult conversations.
Yeah.
So I work at a startup that's probably about 100 people, so call it small or medium, whatever you want to call it.
Small.
We recently actually got rid of OKRs.
Sure.
In favor of majorly important goal, that system.
It's a new one.
It's a new one. I was
I
really,
don't really know how it's
I'm glad you didn't say V2 Mom. 'Cause
I was
that's
thinking
the one
V2 Mom. Oh my
I don't know
God.
that.
That's Salesforce.
It's part of the Salesforce cinematic universe. Yeah.
Yes.
So I don't think we did OKRs right, to be honest. I don't think we're doing the new majorly important goal right. I guess I'm curious
Majorly
to
important
hear
goal.
what
Speak.
you think about, like, does it ever make sense not to do OKRs, and like, in what sense have you seen companies that it actually makes sense to like not go through an OKR process?
Yeah, it's like teaching a pig to sing, waste your time and annoys the pig. There's a lot of, I think it just comes down to the questions, which is, it's not about OKRs and not OKRs. It's, do you want to have focus on the things that absolutely matter? And so it could be called majorly important goal. This is a majorly important goal. We're going to focus on it. Yay, you've won. I might add in, what if we also added in how we know if we succeeded and have some nice metrics on that majorly important goal? You can reinvent OKRs. I know somebody who, they tried OKRs, the system rejected it. Everybody hated OKRs so much that they refused to ever do OKRs. So this guy came around and reintroduced something which was goals with success measures. It was basically OKRs with a new name. And it worked. For whatever mysterious reason, the company understood that language.
Yeah.
So I think there's times where you don't have to call them OKRs, but I'm going to guess there's very rarely a time when you have to have focus on really important things and you're going to want to know how it succeeds. So.
Yeah. Big agree. Yes.
Oh, no, it was all the OKR stuff. It got handled. Thank you.
Amazing. Well, I still had a question now. So from your experience, how do you call BS respectfully and effectively when your stakeholders, your leadership are chasing those metrics that you talked about, or chasing those surface level wins, as opposed to the long-term impact and value?
You do this one.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
I think, again, one of the things I've learned is that if you wind up in a head-to-head yes-no battle with leadership, you're probably going to lose. Mm-hmm. If it's me versus them, and they're like, build this, and I'm, no, build this different thing. Like, it's not going to go well. But if you can create a little space for optionality, but still let them make the decision, that's been sort of the move that I've found most valuable. So if they're like, go build this thing, I'm like, cool, that's a great thing to build. Here are the 3 things we're looking at. One of them is your thing, and there are these other 2 related things. Here's kind of what we think the impact of each one might be. Oh, great and wise leaders, like, we recommend this one, but we'd love to get your thoughts. Because one thing I have found, I wrote about this a lot in product management and practice, is sometimes they just know stuff that you don't.
Yeah.
Like, I've worked with companies where I'm like, my stupid boss is being stupid and wants me to do this stupid thing, and then it turns out that like we're about to get acquired by another company, and that stupid thing was like something we needed to do for due diligence. And they couldn't tell me, yeah, stupid, we're getting acquired by this thing. I was like, you're stupid. And they were like, just go build this thing, please. So I think if you can open up, like, we've all been in the space where like, and Josh Seiden wrote a great book called Outcomes Over Output, and we talk a lot about outcomes over output. The thing I found is the most interesting and the most challenging is creating a system between outcomes and output. Is to like look at how these things are connected. So if leadership comes to you and like, build this thing, and you say, no, build this other thing, you're going to lose. But if you can say, all right, thank you for telling us to build this thing. Here is the system of outcome and output that we believe exists around this thing. Here is how this system would apply to some other potential outputs. Let's look at this together, and then you can make the decision based on the information you have about which of these paths is best to pursue. Because sometimes like they're just going to say, we don't care, go build this thing. And if that's the case, you've done your job. You've presented the information, you've created that system, you've said, to the best of our understanding, here is the relationship between outcomes and output. These are the outputs we believe are most likely to drive the desired outcomes. But if what you get back is like, yeah, that's nice, we don't care, go build this thing, then that was going to be your answer in the first place. And you've done your job to the best of your ability, and hopefully you can go home afterwards and have a good night's sleep.
Yeah, I think assuming that maybe people know things you don't know, or that perhaps the CEO is smart and that's why he's the CEO, she's the CEO, it's not a bad way to go about it.
Yeah.
I remember when I was working with a company and they had to have all these features, and I'm like, my God, only like 10% of this is going to be used by the user. And they're like, yes, but the buyer has to see that we have all the features that the other guy has. And I was like, oh, so I can hide them under menus, right? And he's like, yeah, go for it. As long as we can put it in our list for the sales, that's all you need. So there's a lot of weird forces out there. So. Yeah. Sometimes we're wrong, and it's very painful.
Yes.
I have a question. So, what is the relationship between like product strategy and OKRs? That's why I struggle a little bit. It's like we've got our product vision, we've got our business goals, and then like to me, OKRs and product strategy are a little bit like how do you achieve those things? And I struggle a little bit with kind of the relationship.
I think you said it perfectly. We have a product strategy that is how we realize our business strategy. And then the OKR is what are we doing this particular quarter to make the product strategy happen, and how are we going to measure success? Yeah. I like it when things aren't complicated.
Yeah, I think one of the things I found is that it is much easier to add than to subtract in most corporate environments.
Oh, yeah.
So you will wind up with, again, initiatives and bets and a strategy and all these different things. I worked with a company once that had objectives and initiatives, and they were ambiguously aligned with each other. And I said, well, we have 2 options. Number one, we can align them 100%. Say, like, we're getting rid of one of these things. We just got one concept. It'll be painful now, but it'll be easier moving forward. Or we can say, for the next quarter, here's how they're mapped to each other, and then we'll align them later. What I didn't know is that there was a secret third thing, which was to add bets, and now say we now have 3 things, because, again, it really just came down to like different people on the executive leadership team. I mean, I think one thing that I have found when I was starting in product, I assumed that the room where people came up with strategy was a very serious room where people were like
the
looking
room where
at
it happens.
The room where it happens, right? They were looking at data. They were looking at like, well, our customers say they want this, and we ran the numbers. But in a lot of cases, it's like 3 executives who hate each other in a room wanting to get out of that room as quickly as humanly possible. And they're like, sure, I don't care. Yeah, that's the strategy. Like, whatever, fine. I'm going to go tell my people to do this other thing anyhow. So whatever. Yeah, sure. You want that to be the strategy? Fine. That's your strategy, and I'll have my strategy. So in a lot of cases, I think, again, like the middle is messy, right? Like everything that exists between your team's work and the impact of that work can be very easily muddied by competing or unclear corporate organizing principles. So I really like that framing that you both had of like, you've got your objectives, you've got your goals, you've got your impact level goals, and then a strategy is like, the simple and repeatable, you know, I mean, Richard Rummelt stuff is still classic for a reason, right? Like good strategy, bad strategy.
Sure.
Like a good strategy is simple and obvious and everyone can repeat it. And I come back to that.
The thing is, when you have that many objects, working memory fails,
Yeah.
because you can only remember more like 4 things, forget 7 plus or is. So I just always ask, can the OKR be the one thing you would like people not to forget when you forget everything
I
else?
love that.
Right?
Well, and that's the other thing is, right, if the strategy is how you get there, then the strategy might change in the service of achieving the objective, right? Like, part of why I like that idea of one thing to not forget, and that thing being an impact level or you know, important objective is like, you know, I've worked with a lot of companies where they realize a week in that the strategy is going to fail. But if you can say like, well, that's the strategy we were given, so we're just going to keep marching towards oblivion, that is not a great position to be in versus saying like,
Depressing.
we have to change, we're going to have to change our approach because we're learning and testing and doing all the things that we're supposed to do to figure out that maybe this strategy that seemed great in a boardroom a month ago when everyone was tired and wanted to get out of the boardroom and go home to dinner, and they had been in the boardroom for 10 hours, maybe we have to change that or revisit it based on the things we learned.
Somebody in the back? Yeah, we haven't heard from him.
I work for a large bank as a product manager. And as you mentioned, it's a regulated industry, but that's not the only problem. We have every imaginable problem in the past. And we keep getting our head on those problems, such as technology staff, encouragement, the customer data, everything. It just becomes impossible at times. And my question is that what are your top 2-3 suggestions for long term for banks to look at to solve this problem, getting things done?
So talking about long term is interesting because one of the number one complaints I hear from folks is that they're too focused on short term goals and not focused enough on long term goals. And I think that's really interesting when it comes to cadence, right? Because one of the things I found, I was just working with a company that was really struggling with this issue, and what we wound up coming up with was like, we needed to have some teams whose goals were long term. And if we gave them short term and long term goals, they would only focus on the short term goals. So if we want teams working on a different cadence, we have to insulate them. Now here's what happened, which is interesting. We tried that, and immediately those teams got sucked back into short term priorities. Like we were like, you're the long term team, you don't have to worry about this. And then somebody was like, just kidding, we have a customer that needs something. You're the short term team now. You're going to do this one thing that the customer needs because otherwise we're going to lose our biggest customer. And that opened up a conversation about resourcing and about, is our business model sustainable and what's the company we're actually building? Are we building a company that is long-term vision oriented, or are we building a company that, for better or worse, is in cycles of optimizing quarterly profits? Is the nature of our business, is the nature of how we report success and how success is measured in the broader market such that we're going to have a really hard time looking at that longer term thing? And instead of saying, how do we get that longer term vision, we say, how do we, you know, optimize for what the market expects for us in a way that might make sure that we continue to have good quarterly returns in Q1 of next year as well as Q1 of this year. So again, a lot of it really comes down to that question of like, what does the existential success of the business look like? What are the market level pressures that make it hard for us to do that? And if we work with those rather than against those, if we say like, yeah, look, we are a business that is accountable for quarterly results. Can we frame this up as a matter of, we believe that this will pay off in this quarter in this amount, versus framing it as short-term versus long-term, if we think that if the reality of our lived experience is that short-term is always going to win. Which in my experience is something that I've found is kind of an intractable issue for a lot of companies.
It is. One thing I do like about OKRs is that when you keep having the same OKR over and over and over again, there's a point where you have to go, am I like in Groundhog Day? Is this the moment where I just go, you know what? This is who we are. It's time to stop trying to be somebody who we aren't. Maybe it's time just we accept the fact that we're a highly reactive short term. And if we want to be long term, we're going to have to try something different, like, you know, doing a Clayton Christensen style group that's over here in a different building and works on long term stuff or something. Because if you just keep repeating it and you get the same results, you're nuts.
Last 2 questions.
Yes.
Is there any like common pitfalls? I know it's probably a broad topic, but like, I don't know, 2-3 don't do this to create this OKR burnout. So something like maybe smaller companies, maybe too process heavy, they don't need OKRs. But maybe it all comes down to how you do it.
Yeah.
You mentioned about simple and easy.
Yeah.
and you should-
OKRs, I think, are very well suited to startups because they should be very simple. And as soon as you have a dashboard, something's gone sideways in my book. But I'm a very simple, like I said, I like simple, high-level things. Like the downfalls are always pretty much the same. It's like having a whole bunch of OKRs when you're only 15 people and setting them at the beginning of the quarter, never looking at them again until the end of the quarter, hoping the OKR failure will come. And, like the pitfalls are sort of the same ones over and over again. Hoping that OKRs will fix something that's actually a personnel problem. What about you? What are some you can throw in the pile?
I mean, those would be my first ones as well. The other one I would add is setting your OKRs without a time box around it.
Oh, yeah.
Which is how you wind up in OKR season, where I've worked with teams that will literally stop doing all work to set their OKRs. We worked with a company a while ago with the marketing department at a big music tech company. And I think the most helpful thing we did was saying, like, we have 3 hours to set our quarterly OKRs. And then when we're done, we're done.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. Because you find out if they're good OKRs or not when you use them. So we'll do this 3-hour session and then we're done. Then, like, that's it. We're done setting our OKRs. And really the most valuable conversations came at the beginning of the next quarter when we were like, I remember we wound up having a conversation where everybody was very meticulously scoring. They had read all the things about how it should be between a 6 and a 7.
Oh,
so
good.
of course they're like, everything's a 6.5, nailed it. And we asked somebody on the team, we were like, all right, how much does each of these key results actually help us achieve our objective? Like, how much does each of these key results actually help us do? And they were like, 0.
Yeah.
Nothing. Like, none of these matter. We really only have one goal that we care about. And this was like a marketing department that had a goal of like onboarding a certain number of users. That was like their big banner goal. And they had been so focused on doing OKRs the right way that like they stopped paying attention to the one thing that actually mattered. So the outcome at the end of our quarter was that we were going to stop doing OKRs and instead just focus on this one thing that really mattered and have every conversation center around like, how many users are we getting on? How close are we getting to that goal? Does this really work for us? Does it really matter?
That's some radical focus.
That's some radical focus, exactly.
I like it.
So I think again, like to use an Alan Watts quote, when the menu becomes the meal, when the process becomes a stand-in for the actual success, when you're spending a lot of time setting OKRs rather than actually doing work that will help you deliver against those OKRs, that to me is sort of the biggest trap. And if you can, after a quarter, retrospect on the work we put into doing this is not actually helping us achieve that focus, and we should throw away all the process and just keep this really simple and focused and do the work that matters, even if that means you're not doing OKRs. I think that's a great real-world validated learning, and
I don't have a TM. I don't get 5 cents every time somebody says OKRs. Wouldn't that be nice, though?
Oh, that'd be so nice.
Maybe just follow up. So what's a good balance in your experience in terms of check-in versus just like set it and forget it? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly?
Every Monday and every Friday. Every Monday you commit to what you're doing towards the OKRs, and every Friday you celebrate your wins.
Yep.
It's give the man a book. Yellow book.
Give him a radical focus.
Give him a yellow book. He can have both.
You can have both.
But yeah, there you go. The answers are in the yellow book.
Yeah.
I think we'll just one last question.
Just one last question. It's so amazing. You've given us so much information.
Too much.
I'm going to ask you the impossible question. But the impossible question is like going to bring it together for everyone. It's like, you are the magic wand. Right? It's probably your first sentence in both your books. The magic wand. I'm going to give you two magic wands. How do you start? And what is the thing? Through all these recommendations, you say, if you take one thing away from this topic tonight, what is that one thing that everyone should walk away with?
I've actually got an answer to this one. Could you go back to the slide with the... So what I would do...
You're so obsessed with this.
I'm so obsessed with this. Is like everything that exists outside of this orbit, I would just eliminate. Everything that is not one step away from what matters most to the company would just cease to exist. Like once you go out of orbit, it flies off into deep space and is never seen or heard from again. So that's what I would do, is I would say like, once you start operating more than one step, one why, one mathematical operator away from what matters most to the company, you're operating too far in space.
Can you give an example of in the orbit and one out of the orbit just to bring it home?
Yeah, so I worked with a company that was that had a pretty clear, ambitious revenue target, right? They were like, we want to have this much new revenue coming in. And I was working with the team that had been responsible for building new features to turn this company from a one-product company into a multi-product platform company. And I was working with this team that had been building a lot of features. So features are like pretty far down this, right? We're going to build this new thing. And then they were like, well, we're going to focus on engagement metrics. So how many people use this thing? And I was like, well, can you put like a dollar amount on that? And they're like, meh. And I'm like, okay, we might be too far in space. Why are you building all these different products anyhow? And they were like, well, actually, multi-product users have a higher customer lifetime value than single product users. We've measured it. We know how much. And I was like, now we're getting somewhere, right? We can put a dollar amount on that and say, if we take this many single product users and convert them to multi-product users, based on our data, we have this much revenue on the line, and we can make a contribution that we feel is valuable enough to justify the pretty extensive investment that the company has made in this team. So a lot of what we were doing was just kind of iterating through this and having these conversations and saying, like, is this close enough that we can say in one sentence why this is going to contribute to the company's goals and how much? And kept flying off into space until we got to this number, which again anchored everything the team did for the rest of the year. They were like, how many multi-product users? So we would have prioritization discussions where somebody would say, this is going to add 5 multi-product users. And we were like, our goal is 50,000. Never speak of this again. This is a total waste of our time. Even if the ICE matrix says that it is like a 73, I don't care. If it's not going to get us towards that thing that matters, if it's not going to help us build that focus, then we don't talk about it. And again, I think that for a lot of companies, getting down to that control zone, focusing on the process, on doing OKRs the right way, feels better than staying in this orbit zone where things are outside of our control because they are customer and market level outcomes. So once we're too far away from those outside of our control customer and market outcome level things, whoosh, we fly off into space.
Awesome.
That's my one
And for
thing.
this group, we have ICs, we have leaders, we have everyone. How do we start? How do they start?
So I would start with the first question in the book, which is a very challenging question that I love asking folks, which is, if you were the CEO of the company, would you fully fund your own team? I see some heads shaking. People don't always know this. I didn't think about this for a long time, but product teams are expensive, y'all. We have salaries, and those salaries are nice salaries sometimes. So the first question I usually ask folks is, like, if you were the CEO of the company, would you fund your team? And if the answer is no, then there are conversations that you are much better off having proactively than waiting for someone to have with you. If the conversation is yes, and here's why, okay, good, we have a story to tell. In most cases, the answer is, well, I don't really know, which again means that there are conversations you need to have at your team level to understand why your team is important. Because if you don't ask and answer those questions, then your CFO is going to look at a spreadsheet one day and say, who are these very expensive people? Why are we paying them all this money? And if you don't know, you can't expect your CFO to know.
Well, good.
So, that was just my answer. Christina has an answer.
But it's so good, everybody's clapping.
Give me a soapbox, I'll stand on it until you push me off.
Woo!
It's a mic drop moment.
Excellent. Man drop moment. No, I'll just say the thing I always say, which is just be kind to everyone you meet, for they too are fighting a great battle. I think remembering the empathy for those darn marketing people and that crazy dumb CEO does stupid things, like just be kind to everybody. Everything else will sort itself out.
Yeah. You'll sleep better and be happier if you do that too.
Indeed.
True story.
If I soapbox after years, that'd be crazy.
Thanks so much. There are a few copies of the book left, so if you asked a question and didn't get one, definitely take one. If you didn't ask a question and
you
want
really
one,
want one,
and you really want one, come and get it. But I don't want to take any more of these. Make sure that, everyone on the organizing team, make sure you get one for sure.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for having us here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.